Okay, hello again, Mr. Dear David Icke.
Pleasure to be here, Guy.
How are you, my friend?
I'm very good. I just hope that our sound connection will last this interview.
Mm.
And it's coming and going a bit, but we'll do our best.
We're gonna try to do our best. I'm gonna control my voice and maybe it's gonna work out.
Okay.
Tell me, David, I wanted to ask you about the movie that they are making about you or of you. Can you say a little words about it?
Yeah, it's available now. If people go to davidicke.com, they can watch it now if they want. It's about an hour and 40 minutes or so long. It's called Renegade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was approached by a American film company about a couple of years ago that just thought that my story and what I'm saying would make a good movie. And we filmed it in about 4 countries. I didn't put it together. I didn't edit it or anything. I just was the subject of it. And there's a lot of fly-on-the-wall coverage of me as I go about my life. And included in that is a vast amount of information, dots connected, that you wouldn't normally see in a movie. And I think another important part of the reason for doing it is that it shows me as I am. You know, whether people like what I am is up to them. It's none of my business. But I've been so misrepresented in the media and so misrepresented by some, shall we say, networks out of Israel and the Israeli government, that people get a thoroughly wrong impression of where I'm coming from and what I'm actually saying. So this movie absolutely puts that right. And it's been massively well received in the premieres. And, you know, we talked last time about misrepresentation and how people as a result get a wrong impression of you and what you're saying. One of the premieres in Los Angeles at a theater called the Aero, which is owned by a group called American Cinematique, but also own a famous theater in Los Angeles called the Egyptian. They pulled the premiere of Renegade 2 hours before the premiere was supposed to start. People were arriving. 5 minutes before we arrived to do a technical run-through, they called us in the car. And it was on the basis that it was about me. So the producer's in the back of the car on the phone. I'm in the front, and this man from this theater is shouting so loud down the phone that I can hear every word in the front. And at one point he said, basically, is this a film about David Icke? And the producer said, well, yeah. It said, does it put him in a good light? And he said, well, yeah, it comes across very well, yeah. And he said, well, we're not having the film then. But if the film had demonized me, then it would have gone ahead and there would have been no problem. And this is a movie that doesn't talk about Zionism or Jewish people. And yet, because of the way that I'm portrayed to try to silence me, I mean, it's a simple technique. If you can't find something to demonize someone about, then make it up. And yet, even that got cancelled. So it's something I have to live with. But I hope this film will redress that balance, and people can see me as I am, whatever people think of that, rather than what I'm supposed to be, which is a grotesque caricature and misrepresentation of what I'm saying.
That's right. You know, this is what upset me, because I know your work and I know what you do during many years now. And you talk about united, and you talk about accepting all of us as one piece, because we are all in the same plate, you know, in the end of the day. It doesn't matter if you are in Europe, Middle East, or Argentina. It doesn't matter. We are all one. And those people that talk about you like you are, I don't know, anti-Semite, but they don't have a proof about this because you talk only about good. You're just dividing and explaining that, and I tell you as a Jewish and Israeli Jewish that what you explain is exactly that they are using us, the Jewish Israeli people. All the Zionists are using us, really using us for the, I don't know, money, control, what I know, but I don't want to, and it's so weird that those people talk about you like this. You understand what I mean? It's a conflict. What they are saying.
I can't hear you again, Guy. But I get the gist of the question. So if I kind of answer the question and maybe outline where I'm coming from, it's kind of ironic, as you were pointing out, that I have a philosophy, whatever people may think of it, which is that the true I of all of us is consciousness. It's a state of awareness. That is what is experiencing this world. That is what leaves this world at what we call death. It's the true, infinite, eternal I. It's consciousness. And we are points of attention, I would say, within an infinite flow of consciousness. Thus, the labels that we give ourselves and are given in this short little experience of what we call planet Earth are not who we are. They are experiences for that consciousness. So whether you call yourself Jewish or Muslim or Christian or atheist or Hindu or black or white or whatever, it's just an experience. It's not who you are. It's not who we are. What we are eternally is a point of attention, consciousness, awareness within one vast infinite flow of awareness and consciousness. And thus people might call themselves Jewish if they're born into what we call a Jewish family in Israel, and a Muslim may say the same if they're born in Damascus or something. But actually that's an experience. What we all are, whether people call themselves Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever, is consciousness. And this is the point. We're all expressions of the same infinite consciousness. So we are all expressions of each other. It's the labels that divide us and are meant to divide us. Why can't consciousness, an aspect of consciousness, infinite consciousness, called Palestinians, and an expression of infinite consciousness having an experience called Jewish, why can't they live together in harmony? If they realize that we're all the same consciousness having different experiences, that would be possible. But what happens, because the classic foundation technique of dividing and ruling the target population, and by target population I mean the human population as a whole, is to divide and rule that population by breaking people up into perceived groups and labels, and then playing the labels off against each other. You know, if you looked at the mass of Jewish people and Palestinian people, if there was the willingness there and the understanding there that we're all each other, then there could be a harmonious ongoing society. But because the labels are so divided, they're played off against each other, and so people don't have that harmony that could be. And who is driving these labels? It's not the mass of the Jewish people. It's not the mass of Palestinian people. It's that leadership which exploits the mass of the people, and therefore it's up to surely all of us to start treating each other and seeing each other in terms of being expressions of each other, and thus not fighting each other and being in conflict with each other and competing with each other. This is mine, I'm having it, and start to see the world in a place of equality and justice, where everyone is treated the same, has the same opportunities, and the same treatment in law and in all other things. Instead of this, my label must dominate your label. This is what happens both ways when you start falling into what I call label consciousness and self-identifying with that, instead of the I, the infinite I, that we all are. So when you see my philosophy from that point of view, whether people believe it or accept it or not, it's up to them. The idea that I could be anti this group or anti that group just because they're a member of that group, or anti this or anti that because they are a certain background, color, race, or culture, is utterly, utterly insane. It's against everything that I believe in. I'm saying enjoy the labels, experiences, but realize they're just experiences, which at the end of this life will be over, and you'll start exploring forever in another form, another way, and not get caught in these labels of this brief little sojourn experience on what we call planet Earth. And so what comes from that is, if that's my philosophy, what is the motivation of people in these groups? I call them hate groups because they're trying to get people to hate their targets. What's their motivation in trying to discredit me by depicting me as something that I clearly am not? It's because, like I said earlier, if you can't demonize someone on the basis of what they're saying, then make it up.
You know, very interesting what you said. I call it living the life with sharing and not owning. And what those people are trying to do, dear David, is to quiet you, to shut up what your good words and what you do for humanity. Now you talk about those controllers dividing. You know, there are second elections here in Israel. We had one before almost 2 months, and Bibi Netanyahu could not build a government. So now we are going to the second round. What do you think about this?
Well, when I look at Israeli politics, and that's what I'm looking at, I'm not looking about someone's religion or someone's beliefs or the culture that they self-identify with. I'm looking at political decisions. That's the level I'm challenging this at. And when I look at Israeli politics, and it's not only this, I remember reading a book a little while ago by a former Mossad agent back in the 90s. And he was exposing many of the things that Mossad gets up to. But there was something that really hit me back in the 1990s when he wrote this. He said, the one thing you know about Israeli politics is it keeps moving to the right. Now, surely Israeli society is not reflected in anything like its entirety by the motivations and agendas of Benjamin Netanyahu. And yet, for the way that I understand it from what's been reported, these repeated elections, I think happening in September, have come about because he's having a spat and can't get an agreement with Lieberman. Now, that is not a spat or a disagreement about forming a government between someone representing one area of Israeli society and someone representing another. It's two, what I would perceive from my observation, far right politicians who are basically competing in pulling Israel further to the right. Now, they together cannot possibly reflect anything like the entirety of Israeli society. So who's representing those Israelis that have other opinions and other views? And you see, once you get control of a government over a long period of time, like Netanyahu, you can make fundamental changes in the way things operate that can change the entire face of a society. And I'm not surprised. And again, this suppression of information about what's happening in Israel, which is what this silencing is all about, very rarely and in nothing to like the same scale, covers all the Israelis who are fundamentally fed up with the life they've been handed by the Netanyahu regime and his like over so long. That's why they protest in the streets about their economic situation. See, this is a point that I've made. America gives a vast amount of money every year to Israel, but rank and file Israelis don't see it. It goes into the elite governmental military intelligence networks, and other people are just left to get on with their lives. And this is what happens when you're running an agenda. The agenda is all that matters, and how it affects other people, including Israelis, doesn't matter. The only things that matter is you keep getting power and securing power, and then you do what you like for the next few years until you have to secure power again. And if this was a disagreement and if you like a challenge between Netanyahu and someone that represented the wider Israeli population and their views, then you'd have some kind of political debate. But when you've got Lieberman and Netanyahu, well, crikey, I mean, they're virtually standing on the same postage stamp, and it's not about anything other than power. Who has power, and who has power to change Israel in the way that they want to? This should be surely a people-driven country, not an elite Netanyahu-Lieberman-driven country, which it appears to be at the moment.
When you talk about the money that comes from America to Israel, and if one of the donations or people that gives money to Israel from the US, I have a request. If they see this interview that we are doing, please stop bringing money to Israel if you don't check where this money go. Because, and I'm really serious, I talk in the name of the major of the Israeli people, because those money goes to the social workers. They take our kids from the parents and the fathers, and it goes to the court and to divide the families of the Israeli. This is why I'm really asking, please stop this donation to Israel if you don't check it before where it goes. I'm sorry that I did it in this conversation, but you touched me so much about what you say, David, and I felt an honest moment. So.
Okay, I didn't quite catch the last few words, but I absolutely get your gist, Guy. Now, what you see, this is such an important point. Because I travel around the world and have done now for decades, I have the privilege of being able to see different societies in the same period at the same time. And what has absolutely struck me are the number of subjects and themes that are happening everywhere. What can happen is that if you see your country, whichever country it is, in isolation, and you only basically experience your country, you can believe that what is happening in your country is unique to your country. Overwhelmingly, this is not the case. Why I've been exposing all these decades, this global cabal running a global conspiracy. And you've just raised a very, very interesting point to me, and that is children being taken from loving parents by social services on spurious, made-up reasons. Now, if you only view the world from the, in this case, Israeli experience, you can think that that is unique to Israel. It's not. This is happening all over the world. It's happening where I am now in my own country, Britain. It's happening in America. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in Australia. This is a global phenomenon where loving parents are losing their children. They're having their children literally stolen by the state. The numbers grow all the time, and they keep increasing the criteria that allow social services to steal children, and therefore they can take more and more and more, and this is happening everywhere. So people might then ask the question, well, why is this happening? And you look at child trafficking. You see what's happening in America, and of course, you know, this big again spat over what Trump says he wants to do on the southern border, but a tremendous amount of children coming from Central and South America to try to enter the United States are entering the United States with fake parents, because their parents are actually connected to child trafficking gangs. This is phenomenal. I've been writing about this now since way back in the 1990s, this child stealing trafficking in league with the governmental authorities. And it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think, you know, if people looked at the world and what's happening in the world in general, who live in Israel, they'd realize that enormous numbers of things that are happening in Israel are actually happening everywhere else. So that's not by accident. That's by design. There's an agenda. And one of them is to steal children. And I've talked over the years and written at length about something I call the totalitarian tiptoe, which is where you start at A and you know you're going to Z, but you do it in steps. You don't do it in one go or two bigger step, because people will look up and say, what's going on? Because the change will be so great. So you do it in little steps. And you know, when you look at the writings of people like Aldous Huxley in his book Brave New World in the 1930s, and George Orwell, who wrote 1984 in the 1940s, and people who are connected to this cabal that I've quoted in my own books from '69 and other times, who have predicted present day with remarkable accuracy. And one of the things that Brave New World talks about is the fact that the aim in the end, or the goal in the end, is to create a world in which children do not have parents. They're brought up by the state. Indeed, in the end, even procreation comes to an end. And that may sound, oh, that's just a novel by Aldous Huxley from the 1930s. Well, actually, it may be a novel in some of the use of his imagination, but in theme, it's not. Just like Orwell's 1984 wasn't a novel, the themes were accurate and came from an understanding of where the world was going. That's why they proved to be so incredibly accurate. And when you look at all over the world, parental influence over the lives of their children is being eroded everywhere, where schools are getting more and more power to I mean, in this country, if you don't send your, if you go on holiday in school time, because at that time holiday companies charge less, and soon as the school holidays come, when the children can go on holiday, of course the prices go through the roof. It's exploitation. But in this country, if you take your child on holiday in school time because it's cheaper, or because that's the only time your parents can have a holiday, you get fined. I mean, this would have been unbelievable when I was growing up, but it's now become the norm. And this social services stealing of children is all, again, part of this totalitarian tiptoe, these stepping stones towards this point where parents lose all control and influence over what happens to their children, and the state controls everything. And of course, we've got another frontline example of that, and that's the gathering move towards mandatory vaccinations, where parents literally, in states in America, etc., and it's a thing that's gathering across the world, parents don't even have the choice to decide if their children should be vaccinated or not, even if they've looked at the evidence and thought, no, I don't want to subject my child to this because it doesn't look safe to me, it doesn't look good for their health to me. They now face mandatory vaccinations. And this is, again, all part of this eroding of parental choice and influence about their own children, which is designed to end in the end, where parent influence is gone altogether.
Well, you're right 100%. And what do you think is the last step that they are going to make? I mean, where it is going?
Well, where it's going is very clear, and not only that, where it's going, they're telling us. One of the things that needs to concentrate people's minds more than anyone, and of course in Israel, you have this vast centralization of internet cyber power that's been developed out of the Beersheba complex and military units like 8200, etc. So, you know, like I say, it's technology that where this is supposed to go. And when you look at people like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, openly talking about the fact that by 2030-ish, people will start to have their brains connected to artificial intelligence. This is the end game. Now, up to this point, because the stadium in which this whole control is played out, whether it's in Israel or in Britain or globally, is human perception. It's control of human perception, because from human perception comes human behavior. Control perception, you control behavior to a large extent, and perception comes from information received. So up to this point, they have been trying to control the information that people receive to form perceptions which lead to behavior. And these early years of the internet, there has been much more a free flow of information on the internet, and it's had a fantastic effect on allowing people to see that there are other explanations for life, for world events and happenings that they weren't seeing before, or the information they weren't getting before. And so now we're seeing this systematic tidal wave of censorship on the internet through Facebook and Google and Amazon, etc., Twitter, which is trying to shut down, and it's doing it to a greater extreme all the time. Another big, another step of that has happened in the last few days, to stop this flow of information that looks at the world in another way, because they only want people to receive information that the authorities want them to see, because that forms their perceptions and thus their behavior. But the end game, where this is leading, is to go even further than that, where no longer do they have to manipulate information to control perception, Perception comes direct through AI. And AI is taking over everything. You know, if people go through a kind of, you know, average everyday life, they will start to notice that AI is more and more impacting upon human society. But if they go deeper into it, from what they see in the mainstream, they'll realize that AI is already fundamentally directing and controlling human society and what goes on. But this is only where we are. Where it's meant to go is that AI controls everything, absolutely everything. This is what this Internet of Things is all about. And it shows how fast it's moving, because I was warning in my books about this Internet of Things and not that long ago. I mean, you know, maybe 15 years ago. And now the Internet of Things is here with us. And that is when eventually everything, that's the goal, is connected to the internet and is controlled by an internet controlled by AI. We're now having more and more of the military moved across to AI, where AI is going to, and already is to some extent, making decisions about who lives and who dies. This is where we're going. And then the next question comes from that. Well, okay, if AI controls everything, including human perception, who's controlling AI? And the answer becomes this: if controlling AI means controlling everything that AI is connected to, then it means that a very, very, very few people have control ultimately of AI, and thus control of everything AI has control of. So what you're doing is you're creating a technological structure in which this 5G communicative system that's being rolled out with no testing at all is meant to increase the power of and potential of absolutely massively. Means you're creating a technological structure which is going to allow and is allowing fewer and fewer and fewer people to dictate everything, including human perception.
So danger.
Yeah, but this 7.7 billion people and growing that are being manipulated. The number of people that are actually doing it in full knowledge that they're doing it and why is tiny by comparison, absolutely, almost laughably tiny. And so the answer is there. We can only be manipulated if we allow ourselves to be manipulated. We can only have power imposed upon us by giving our power away to that which is imposing power upon us. And if we acquiesce to this and get caught in the labels, so we're so busy fighting each other, we don't look up and see that the same hands are controlling the strings of all these labels being played off against each other. It doesn't matter whether you're Israeli or American or South African or Australian or Estonian. Ultimately, in this global web, the same hands are manipulating your society. Mm-hmm. But they want the conflict and the perception of labels to have conflict between, because that divides and rules the target population, so that we are so focused on fighting each other, condemning each other, that we don't see that we're all being manipulated by the same force.
Well, how the people don't realize that they are not happy with their life because they are forced to live this way, the life. I mean, if you don't have money, you cannot eat, you cannot drink, you cannot live, you cannot have a house. I mean, all the things that they are really free in life, we're born with those things free, are being taken. I mean, this is the first control on the human being.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when people talk about banking and finance and I would say, grotesque concentration of wealth in the hands of increasingly few people all the time, They think of greed. It's about greed. Well, on one level, it is. But the real reason for control of finance and banking, etc., and control of the creation of money is control. Because as you rightly point out, you know, in the world that we live in, well, let's just take one step back and define what freedom is. Freedom, from my definition anyway, is choice. It's the ability to make choices. The more choices you have, the freer you are. The fewer choices you have, the more controlled you are. And in the world as it's been structured and developed in the last few centuries, money is the greatest dictator of choice and thus freedom. If you said to people, what would you really like to do with your life? And they'd tell you what they wanted to do, and they'd really love to do this, and they'd really love to go there or whatever. And you say to them, well, why aren't you doing it? High in the 90% would say, because don't have the money. So control the money, you control choice, you control freedom. And so many people in the world today still don't realize where money comes from. They think that somehow the governments create it. Actually, money is overwhelmingly created, what we call money, by private banks issuing non-existent, only in theory, fake money called credit. If you go into a bank and you want to borrow a loan, say, I don't know, £50,000 or so, what happens is, first of all, you have to sign over to the bank your wealth that does exist. It might be a house or resources or whatever. And then the bank, in return for that, types into your account £50,000 that has never, does not, and will never, in actuality, exist, called credit. When you therefore, often through no fault of your own, maybe the bankers themselves, like in 2008, create an economic crash or downturn, which through no fault of your own, you're not working any less hard. In fact, you're working harder, but the circumstances created in 2008, for instance, by the banks, mean that you can't pay back that loan to the banks. So what do? They get your resources that do exist in return for non-existent so-called credit. It's called fractional reserve lending, where banks are allowed, because this cabal that controls the banks also controls governments and thus passing laws, it allows banks to lend vastly more than they actually have in the form of this non-existent credit. One other thing that happens is that when you go to take out a loan, say this £50,000 or whatever, they create out of nothing £50,000. But you're not paying back £50,000. You're paying back £50,000 plus interest. The interest is never created. So every time a loan's taken out, what is owed is greater than the money that's been created even by credit in the loan. And this means something very, very fundamental to the human race. It means that at no point is there ever even nearly enough units of exchange, what we call money, credit or otherwise, in circulation for all the outstanding principal debt and interest debt to be paid back. Therefore, people losing their homes, losing their land, their resources, their possessions is built into the system. Now, when you have an expansion of the economy, when they pump more of this credit into it, this Peter pay Paul situation can hide that fact that there's not enough money to pay back all the debt and interest on the debt. But when you have a recession, a downturn, and money comes out of circulation, well, it's painfully obvious with people losing their possessions, their homes, that there's not enough money in circulation to pay back all the debt. And this has been going on for centuries. So what's been happening is the few that have controlled the banking system and the financial system have been exchanging non-existent credit for real resources decade after decade after decade. And this has sucked the real wealth of the world into the hands of a few people. And what the rest of the population has been overwhelmingly left with is what we call money that is only worth anything because we believe it's worth something. And therefore we take it seriously. But it's not really worth anything without that that public acceptance that it's worth something. I mean, what's a piece of paper worth? Only the paper it's got. It's worthless. But because it's got a number on and someone will accept it as money, it becomes accepted as wealth. But the real wealth, in terms of resources, etc., that's been consumed by this cabal. And this is why you get less than 10 people now, even officially those you see in the public arena, own the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of the world population. This is what happens when you hand over to a private cabal the power of actually creating money. Why aren't governments creating money interest-free and circulating it among the population to be used to empower the creative powers of the population? Why are governments borrowing money at interest from private banks, which they do? And then the population, the taxpayer, then has to pay back the principal and the interest to the private banks. Mm-hmm. Why aren't governments? They're the government. Why aren't they creating money interest-free without borrowing it from banks? Why? Because the same people that control the banks control the governments, and so that's what they do. And I look, Guy, I look at left-wing parties, so-called left-wing parties, right-wing parties, people in the middle of this illusory political spectrum, and I hear them talking about interest rates should go up and interest rates should go down, that there should be more taxation or less taxation. When do we ever hear any of them, including the so-called radical left, saying, hold on a minute, what are we doing allowing private banks to lend money created out of nothing called credit and then charge interest on it? And hold on a minute, why are governments borrowing money at interest from private banks? I never hear these questions when it's fundamental to human choice, therefore human control. How much money coming from taxpayers and the labor of the population, how much goes every year to pay back principal and interest on government borrowing from private banks? Globally, it would be shocking, staggering, jaw-dropping to know that figure.
That's right. When I was a kid, my father all the time said to me, Guy, money doesn't grow on trees. I said, okay, but they are making them from trees. So
yeah, it grows on trees. If you created money, Guy, out of nothing, and you started circulating it, you get arrested, wouldn't you? They'd say he's a counterfeiter. He's creating money out of nothing. The banks do it every working hour of every day worldwide, and it's perfectly legal because the laws have been passed to allow them to do it for reasons I've explained. If we're going to take control back of human society from the tiny few, the elite, if we're going to take choice back from those that dictate and suppress our choice, then we have to get control of the creation of money back from private banks and have governments issue the currency interest-free instead of borrowing it from the private banking cartel. And you know, it's kind of interesting. Abraham Lincoln was starting to introduce something called greenbacks, which were interest-free money created by the government, bypassing the private banks. And he went to see a play at a theater, the Ford Theater, and never came back alive. President Kennedy, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but President Kennedy was in the process of issuing interest-free government-created money called silver certificates, I think they were called. And he went to visit Dallas and never came back. This is their worst nightmare, that humanity, all of us, take back control of the creation of money, because that's the basic foundation through which they control everything. And thus, I mean, for instance, if you control the money, and therefore you have limitless amounts of money, you know, this cabal is moving trillions of dollars around the world every day, and this cabal is deciding if stock markets go up or stock markets go down. So if someone came to power in government that genuinely wanted to make a difference for people, then this cabal could crash that country's economy, crash its currency, and stop that those changes for the benefit and justice and fairness to people being implemented. It's happened many times. And then you look at the control of the internet through Facebook and Google, and you look at Amazon and all these companies. You look at companies like Uber, this taxi company. What happens is they start out, and although for a lot of early years, they're not making a profit, money keeps getting pumped in from somewhere. And because this money's being pumped in, they can do things and grab market shares that genuinely independent companies do not have the financial resources to do. So what happens is these companies keep gathering more and more of the market until they become near monopolies, which is what we've seen with so many of these Silicon Valley companies. It's like money's no object. You look at Amazon's history. It didn't make money for a very, very long time, but money was still no object being pumped in. And that allowed greater and greater market share, which, you know, mom and pop businesses, independent businesses, middle range businesses, even some big businesses couldn't compete with that. How can you when you're being externally funded where the others are not to anything like the same extent? So what you do then is you create a monopoly. And because you are making such a fortune from that monopoly in the end, any other people that come up, like another video platform to challenge the monopoly of YouTube, social media platforms to challenge the near monopoly of Facebook, etc. Well, these near monopolies then have the financial power to crush them or buy them up, which is what Facebook has done with Instagram and WhatsApp, etc. Or just buy them up and take them over, which means that their monopoly gets even greater. So, and this limitless virtually supply of money to put you in that position is coming from the same sources that are ultimately controlling the creation of money.
That's right. You know, this channel that we open called We Act that Live, and it's for the people, to the people, for the people. It's to unite all the Israelis together and talk about the truth and exposing everything. And this specific show, my show, it calls Is Real. It's like Israel, but is real. And I want to ask you, okay, what I see that people don't see. Please try to help me to open more eyes in this interview, because when I go to in the streets, I see the police have big and new buildings, you know, and all the government have new buildings, and banks have new buildings, but people are having less and less and less, losing their homes, losing. What I see that they don't see, that they don't realize that everything of the government go up, and this, you know, the banks and everything, but the life of the people, of the family, go down. What I see that they don't see, maybe.
Well, in my books over the last, I don't know, 20 years or more, I've been talking about something that I said was planned and was actually unfolding in front of our eyes, and it's become more and more obvious all the time, that I called the Hunger Games Society. And this was what I said was where society was being taken if we allowed it. And that is, if people imagine a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid, you have a tiny few people, what's become known as the 1%. This cabal that runs finance and all the other things. Then at the bottom, you've got the mass of humanity who by the time that this plan reaches fruition will basically be in poverty and control. And between the mass of humanity at the bottom of the pyramid and the few at the top is, in the middle, a merciless, tyrannical police military state, which does two things. A, it imposes the will of the 1% upon the rest of the population, and it stops the rest of the population challenging the 1%, so holding that Hunger Games society status quo. And we go back again, Guy, to what I talked about, the totalitarian tiptoe, and that's what we're seeing. Again, this is another all around the world it's happening, where, first of all, I mean, I can talk from a prime example in Britain. When I grew up in the 1950s and into the 1960s, police officers used to walk the streets. It was called being on the beat in Britain. Used to have their own little area of the community, and they'd walk down the street. The most lethal weapon they had was a truncheon, which was very rarely used. And they'd stop and they'd talk to the kids, and they'd talk to people. They'd say, you know, are you having any problems? You know, what's going on? And you'd say, look, I've got a problem here. And they'd come over and they'd say, okay, well, we'll deal with that. And that was what they called community policing. When you look at the police in Britain today, increasingly, they look like troops. And these elite levels of them absolutely are troops, carry the same basic weapons as troops. And so there's been an absolute transformation. It's happened in America as well, and everywhere, of law enforcement. It's gone from working with the community to imposing its will on the community. And like I say, this is not happening in one country or two countries. It's happening everywhere. And this is part of this whole police state unfolding in the totalitarian tiptoe towards this Hunger Games society. That, connected to the law enforcement transformation, is ever more extreme surveillance and all the technology that you can't go anywhere without the authorities can know where you are. This is one of the major reasons they want driverless cars. And so this is unfolding all the time. And if we don't see how the dots connect, how the steps connect and where it's going, and start to say we're not having it in some considerable united number, then we're going to end up in this Hunger Games society. And I have kids and I have grandkids, and I don't want them or any other kids or grandkids to live in that world. That's why I do what I do. And so this divide and rule is so. See, this is how it works. You've got people in Israel who are getting concerned about what's happening in their society. And again, what you're seeing, as you mentioned, you're seeing now more and more starkly this accumulation of wealth and power at the top of this pyramid. And you explain that government spending, no object. Military spending, no object. Spending on things that advance this agenda, no object. Money spent on people sleeping in the street, don't have enough to eat. Oh no, that's the problem for them to sort out. Not for governments. No. They're there to advance this agenda, and this is where you get this apparent contradiction between all this money being spent on agenda projects and government projects, while the people in whatever country suffer from deprivation. I mean, in America, it's extraordinary the deprivation that's going on, and the vast increase in homelessness across America. So you have people in Israel who are unhappy with what's happening there, but then you've got people in America who are unhappy at the same things happening there. In Britain, ditto. In France, ditto. One of the reasons they had this yellow vest protests that have been going on. Everywhere, in different countries, people are unhappy and suffering deprivation because of the same situation. But what they then do is they play this country off against this country off against this country. So the focus of attention is on conflict between different expressions of the manipulated society, called different names and labels, and not on that which is controlling everything. Yeah, are we really to believe that the mass of people in Israel would not get on if we put down the things that divide us and just got on with our lives with people in Syria or Iraq? We're saying that people in Iran, the general population, wouldn't get on with people in America if they were just allowed to get on and interact as human beings. Of course they would get on if left to their own devices. But the few in each country want to divide and rule, so this country's demonized by this country, so that common discourse cannot happen. Yeah. And this country then demonizes this country, so the same cannot happen. And so you have an agenda, for instance, at the moment, which I've been writing about for so long, of regime change and conflict with Iran. And of course, with that nuclear deal, all that had died down. And people were saying to me, see, that conflict with Iran you said they wanted, it's not going to happen because, look, they've got this nuclear deal now. It's all agreed. And I said to them, just wait. Mm-hmm. And what happened? Trump came in under big influence, by the way, from Netanyahu, massive fundamental influence from Netanyahu and people like Sheldon Adelson, his biggest funder, the Israeli media owner and Las Vegas casino magnate. And
Kushner, of course.
Yeah. Don't talk to me about Kushner. And then the deal is scrapped, and now it all kicks off. And now it's getting more and more extreme and more heated because they want a conflict with Iran. Now, the people of Iran don't want a conflict with America. And most of the people in America do not want a conflict with Iran. But these elites that actually dictate things, not the general population, the elites that grab the positions of power and financial power, they are bringing people into conflict all the time. It's happened throughout human history, who really don't have any argument or real problem with the other side. I mean, I've said this many times before. If you've got troops, say you've got Israeli troops in the Israeli Defense Forces, mm-hmm. and you sat them in a room with people from Gaza or Palestinians from the West Bank, shut the door, give them something to eat, give them some tea, shut the door, and let them talk. Let them talk about their problems, their fears, how they would like things to be, how one affects the other. And overwhelmingly, not necessarily every time, but overwhelmingly, these people would walk out as friends. I've seen it happen from time to time because they have been allowed to talk to each other and not via preconceived ideas and propaganda that give people a view of someone, and this someone a view of them, that is based not on who both of them are, but on how each perceives the other because of the propaganda. You know, people get on generally. You know, people go on holiday and they'll meet someone from another country. Maybe those governments of the two countries are in conflict. And they'll sit round a table and they'll have a lovely chat. Because people would get on if the cabal allowed them to get on. But the cabal has no interest in people getting on, because it wants divide and rule and conflict. So we're fighting each other and not seeing them, and focusing upon the cause of human discord rather than fighting among ourselves.
This is the way to control, divide and control.
Yeah.
This is what they do. You know, as an Israeli, I can tell you, and I was also in the army. I'm really sorry about that, but I was there. And I can tell you that Arabs and Israelis are really meant to live with no problem together. Really. I mean, we have a lot of in common. We have, we like the same things. I mean, everything is same. So,
well, I have this question, Guy, for the Israeli government.
please.
Why do you have to make it a Jewish state? I'm talking as an outsider here.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't it be an Israeli state where Jewish people follow their religion and it's respected, and Muslim people follow their religion and it's respected? I mean, I don't follow either religion, but I respect both people's rights to make their own choices,
Mm-hmm.
and live their life as they see fit, so long as they don't impose it on anyone else. And this is where the problem comes. The desire and the arrogance to seek to impose your way of life and your beliefs on other people. You know, if I can have a chat with a Muslim about their religion, I don't follow their religion, but okay, I agree with that bit. I don't agree with that bit. Don't agree with that bit. Yeah, I can agree with that, and we can have a nice chat. I've done it many times. I can have a chat with a Jewish person who may be, a vehement follower of Judaism. And I don't agree with what that person believes, but I respect his right to have that belief. And we can have a chat and share the way we see life, and then, shake hands and get on with our lives. This is what's possible. But if I'm trying to impose my will upon the Jewish man or the Muslim man, or they're trying to impose their beliefs on me, then we've got a problem, because I'm not going to have that.
You have to remember one thing.
They won't have it if I try to impose my will on them.
Yes.
This is the problem, Guy.
I understand.
This imposition. Let's just relax and just respect everyone's right to have their view, their opinion, and then we'll all be fine.
Well,
we have to agree.
I can tell you, Israel is not forcing nobody, the Jewish, is not telling everybody what to do. I mean, you have your Muslims, you have your Christians, you have your everything, everybody in Israel that can have an ID, as an Israeli also. But he's a Muslim that is an Israeli citizen. He has the rights and everything. I just talk about the conflict that we have with all the Arabs around, not inside, because inside everything is okay. About the humanity, yes? I talk about what is around. And this is something that Israel cannot stop. Because when he stops this conflict, there is no unique about Israel. This is what I think. About the government, yes, of course. Because this is the only place that all the religions really can live together. I mean, this is what happens in Jerusalem, it happens in Haifa, it happens. You have all the religions. I want to focus.
The problem is, Guy, is when Netanyahu and that government introduces the nation-state law.
Mm-hmm.
that says this is a Jewish state, and Jewish people have the right to self-determination. And there's a downgrade on Arab Israelis. I don't think that's going to bring people together. It's going to drive people apart.
Of course.
And if the occupied lands continue as they are, especially since Trump, to be more and more covered in Jewish-only concrete, then of course the two-state solution is finished. Two-state solution. I have to laugh sometimes, and not in a funny way, in a kind of ironic way, when I still see politicians say that they believe in the two-state solution, because it's almost like that it's just something to explain away so that they don't have to debate it or look at reality. I believe in the two-state solution. But the more and more that the occupied lands are settled by the Israeli government, then the two-state solution disappears, because basically the land for a second state simply isn't there. So we're in a situation where we either go down the road of the Jewish state being its view on will dominating everything, or hey, okay, all these settlements, all these things that have happened, two-state solution is I mean, where's it gonna be? So there's another solution, which is, hey, why don't we just live together? Why don't we just live together? Everyone's treated equally, and we treat it as an Israeli country of multiple ethnicities, and not dominated by one.
Beautiful.
And I think then a lot of the general population would support that. But of course, those that have an agenda certainly won't support that. They want to push it in another direction.
Of course. Well, I don't want to take your time more than what we have for this conversation. But what I realize in this interview, dear David, is that this earth have a dome, and we have the domain free, the all of that is above the dome, under the dome. I mean, this is the free dome that we have to ask for all the countries, all the land, all the vegetables, fruits, animals, people, everything. I mean, if you want to control, go up the dome, not down. I mean, this is, we are life, that's it. We are not...
no matter what the label.
Yeah, no matter what the label, really. Well, it's a pleasure and a big honor always to talk with you, dear David.
Same with you, Guy. It's always a pleasure. And if people watch Renegade, which they can get via davidicke.com, they can watch via davidicke.com, they'll see that the person they've been told about in the propaganda is not the person who I actually am, and maybe they're then asked this question we talked about earlier. So why are they lying about him? To get people to so that he'll be silenced. The answer to that question will tell you what the agenda really is.
Of course, I'm going to put the link in this interview, in the the name and everything. And what can I say? Until the next time, dear David, I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Guy. Lovely talking to you.
And we're gonna be in contact.
Sure.
David, big hug from Israel. I send you a big shalom.
Thank you. Yeah, big hug back. Let's put the fault lines down and start getting on with each other, for goodness sake.
Of course. This is what I want also. Thank you, dear David.
Thanks, mate.
Goodbye.
People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality. is nothing like we think it is.
When I saw what Ike is doing, like I was a bit jealous on him. Like, wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here. The world needs renegades.